G'day Dark Realmers, it's horror author and illustrator Michael J. Elliott here with you again, and today I'm going to be doing my top 10 picks for horror novels that would do great as horror movies. Hey, if this is your first trip to the diaries, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. If you want to keep up with the best in book, movie, trivia and creepypasta from the world of horror, then hit that subscribe button and the bell notification. Okay, Dark Realmers. Well, after reading thousands of books during my life, top 10 was a hard pick, okay? But let's get started. Yeah. Okay, Dark Realmers. Now, before we begin our countdown, I just wanted to point out the criteria for this list. Now, each position in no way indicates that one book is better than another or one is higher or lower in my order of preference. That's just the way I've ordered them. And the criteria I looked at when establishing this list was very much story, content, originality, and things that I could see visually being translated into from the written word as a novel to a screenplay to ultimately a movie. So let's get started with my top 10 list. Okay, Dark Realmers, Erebus is the movie you would have as a vampire movie when you're not actually watching a vampire movie. Okay, now let me explain. The story concept is brilliant. It starts off in a small rural area of Britain, and strange things start happening. Animals that are in the abattoir destined to be slaughtered start, stampeding and killing the workers, and it happens on farms and so forth. Then people notice that other strange things start happening. Some people start developing an intolerance towards the sunlight, okay, and they start developing a taste for raw meat and blood, and they're lethargic, their nails grow. Okay, well, it all ties in with a new chemical that's been added into animal feedlots, okay? Now, the makers of this said chemical didn't realise that it actually triggers the conditions in humans called porphyria. Now, this is no made-up, fantasy medical condition. It's true, Dark Realmers. I did research on it. And porphyria is an illness where the body, or the blood more specifically, develops an incapability of developing iron, okay, and also converting things, chemicals and so forth. And it does result in very severe cases, I might add, of people developing an intolerance towards sunlight, the craving for bloody meat or blood itself, because the body is hungering, it's crying out for iron. And, it has, in recorded history, actually resulted in people attacking other people. Now, that's frightening. Could you imagine a medical condition that's actually, like the basis for a novel? This is really, really frightening. And Shaun Hutson's cleverly at the end of the book, after you've been shocked and gone, whoa, he's actually mentioned the disease. And he's gone on to mention that porphyria itself may be one of the reasons the legends of vampirism and vampires developed is because of people afflicted with a really severe case of this disease. So I think this would make a great movie, okay? And it's set in Britain, and I always believe that there's something about this would make a great indie film, I believe, because I believe indie filmmakers could do it with a passion, okay? And there's always something, I don't know, a little bit quirky, something more enjoyable about, low budget British horror films, okay? So check that book out for yourself and see if you agree with me on that one, Dark Realm. Now, I probably read this book at the wrong time during my reading life, Dark Realmers, because I was undergoing or just starting my recovery from a very severe mental nervous breakdown. And basically, the story Koontz gave me absolutely terrified me and scared the crap out of me. So much so that I was really thinking twice about visiting and keeping my psychologist appointments. Okay, he is that good. Now, the premise is we've got a psychiatrist who's very much like a sort of celebrity psychiatrist. He's like a Dr. Phil of the psychiatric world, and he's rich and he's famous, and he has a queue of patients a mile long. And, you know, one of the characters that goes to see him, it was funny because I'm reading the book and she's in the waiting room and reading a book, and she keeps reading the same sentence, and of course it's printed out there, and I'm thinking, bloody hell, geez, they should have edited this better. This is, you know, like, God, this is bad editing. You know, they've included the same sentence. But then, of course, the penny dropped, and it wasn't. It was her. She was in this state where she was meant to be happy, and you know, she'd been reading a book but not absorbing it, and she's reading the same page over and over, or the same part over and over again, and describing the book to herself. Oh, it's a good book, you know, good characters and everything like that. Well, this psychiatrist has done this to her, and the story progresses, and when she gets home, she finds herself with this utter phobia about everything in the house that could kill someone or cause damage to them. So she gets rid of everything, and she realizes something's wrong, and she calls her husband. Now, as the story progresses, we find this psychiatrist is actually a bit of a sociopath stroke psychopath himself. He discovered at a very early age that he could make people do things he wanted, not with some mental hocus pocus or anything like that. He just had this persona, and he gets his jollies by actually inflicting false memories and false phobias into his patients and then toying with them. And there's one scene where he visits one of his patients and, you know, makes her have sex with him, and he gets tired with her, so he says, you're going to kill yourself now, and she goes in the bath, and you can feel the mental struggle as she's cutting her wrist. She doesn't want to do this, but she's compelled to do it, and oh my God, I was in tears. This is a really great book. It would make a fantastic thriller, Dark Realmers, especially if you find, like I do, the scariest kind of monsters are the humankind. Hey, Dark Realmers, did you have toast for breakfast? Maybe you had cereal or waffles. Or depending on your time of night, maybe you had pasta for dinner, okay, depending on what time you watch this video. Well, imagine never being able to have those again, forever. And that's one of the premises of John Christopher's The Death of Grass. Now, it begins innocently enough, but tragically, of course, with a rice famine in Southeast Asia. But then things progress, and there's a massive barley failure and a massive wheat failure, and what happens is there's a virus that is wiping out all forms of grass on the planet. Okay, now think about that for a moment. It's really, really deep. we're not just talking about, you know, like our bread and our pastas and, you know, whatever. We're talking about the death of animals too. The herbivores like the cows and, you know, goats and the meat that we eat. No more protein, okay? It's just horrific to think about. And that's why this novel would make such a wonderful movie, Dark Realmers, because it's horrifying in, you know, a sort of post-apocalyptic sense. And it involves a character, and he's struggling to get to his brother's potato farm in England. And of course, along the way, he encounters a lot of dangers because we all know what humans are like. You know, we've seen scenes on the news, those tragic scenes of people fighting to get, you know, relief supplies, you know, because they're starving. We've seen starving children in Africa. Now imagine that everywhere, even in our Western society, okay? Imagine no more cows anywhere. Horses die. The whole ecosystem is just shattered, okay? Can you imagine anything more terrifying? I certainly can't. And this would make such a wonderful movie because you know, it resonates with everyone. You don't have to be a horror fan, okay? You just have to eat. And I'm pretty sure most of us do that, okay? So if you could imagine that you're basically doomed to starve to death, you know, unless something happens, something changes. And we put ourselves in the position of this character fighting his way towards his brother's farm where he believes there's at least a modicum of safety, okay? This is a wonderful novel, Dark Realmers, and although this isn't a book review video per se, check it out for yourselves because I think you'd agree it would make a fantastic horror stroke thriller movie. Well, Dark Realmers, I've been a big fan of Shaun Hutson for many, many years, and my love affair with his writing began in my early teens when I used to pop up off to my local favourite bookshop, Mr. Browser's Bookshop in my hometown, and start buying up horror books. And he was one of the first writers I discovered, and he really frightened me. Now, this is probably my favourite of his, and I have to admit I haven't read all of them. But this is just absolutely terrifying, and it involves a character, and I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, but he, as a child, becomes fascinated with fire, and he sets fire to his home, which kills his baby brother and also disfigures him. Well, we cut to where he's now working in a hospital as a sort of, you know, groundskeeper, maintenance man, something very low level because he's you know, sort of shunned and he's a little bit slow. Well, at this clinic or this hospital, there are abortions carried out. Now, he becomes riddled with guilt about the death of his brother, and he feels that these fetuses deserve something better. So he steals 3 fetuses, aborted fetuses, and buries them to give them a good burial. Well, through an act that I won't tell you about, these fetuses come to life and they have the ability to control his mind. And he digs them up, and like, that's terrifying to start with. But then the scene where they say, we're hungry, or, you know, mentally, and he has to slice himself open to feed them like a mother breastfeeding is just, oh. Now, these fetuses, you can understand they'd be really pissed off. And so they're ordering him to go on to a killing spree, killing, you know, the women that aborted them, the doctors and everything. Now, to me, this would make one of the creepiest movies ever. And when I was reading this, I was just thinking, oh my God, special effects and makeup could do so much with these fetuses. Now, you saw from that cover, they look creepy just on a cover. So could you imagine what they're like, you know, coupled with this character who is being controlled by these, you know, semi-human creatures? It's just terrifying, and I feel it would make a fantastic movie. Okay, and check out the book for yourself, because if you're a little bit squeamish, you may not agree that it should be a movie and should stay just on the printed page. Now, one of the things I love reading are books where the protagonist has a physical or a mental flaw that's going to impair them in somehow. Because let's face it, I'm a writer and I can tell you creating characters is hard enough, but to give them limitations that are severely going to hamper their development during the book is just incredible. And I admire any author who can do that, because it's really like the author is tying one arm behind their back. And they have to be very, very careful that, they don't forget this limitation, or they write something that totally goes against, the flaw that they've given this character. Now, in this book, Dean Koontz gives us a great character, a young guy called Chris Snow, and he has this very rare form of genetic illness. And I won't even tell you what it's called, because no one can pronounce it, but for short they're called Zeppers, and they're very rare. And he has a severe reaction to any form of sunlight. He cannot go out in the sunlight at all, and he severely can burn, and his eyes are just so sensitive. So he only gets to see his town at night, and the town is called Moonlight Bay. Yeah, just like the Doris Day song. And we all know that's when the nasties come out, always in books, okay? Now, when Chris starts sensing there's something happening, something evil is coming to his town, we're, sort of with him all the way, but we know, wow, how's he going to deal with this? I mean, all it takes is for the antagonist to change his modus operandi by operating during the day, and that's going to severely bugger him up. So this is a great book, and it's one of a series of books about Moonlight Bay that Dean Koontz has written. Now, I'm more of a Dean Koontz fan than I am a Stephen King fan, because I just think Dean Koontz does psychopaths so well. And I do think when it comes to making movies, he's really severely underrated. There's been a couple of attempts to make his books into movies, and they've just been really badly miscast. For example, Odd Thomas, which is a great series about a young guy who can actually see death. You can see it as a form of almost like Harry Potter Dementors, and how he has this psychic magnet, and he's drawn. He has to go to where death is going to be appearing, or violent death. They turned that into, and that was woefully miscast. I really couldn't get into it, and it was nothing. It stuck to the book, but it just wasn't enjoyable. So this would make a really great movie, okay? And as I said, he's really severely underrated. And if you haven't read this, check it out for yourselves, because I think you'll enjoy this. Well, Dark Realmers, if you thought Chris Snow from Fear Nothing had it bad, imagine having a disease that's so rare it's actually named after you. Well, in this great indie story by Nick Prog, that's exactly what it is. Henry Binns has a disease, or an illness, I should say, where he can only stay awake for 1 hour out of every 24. Okay? And I'm not talking about, oh dear, I feel a bit tired, I'll toddle off to bed. No. It doesn't matter where he is or what he's doing. For after that 1 hour, he will collapse unconscious. So you can see how dangerous it is. If he doesn't get home in time to the safety of his home, or even when he's at home, if the safety of his bed. And there's scenes in this where he falls asleep on stairwells and falls down, and oh, it's just wonderful, because you get a strong sense of this man has 1 hour per day. He's got a schedule, everything, fit in everything, 2 minutes for bathing, 5 minutes for eating, so forth. And he has a housekeeper that prepares all his food and everything, and prepares meals that can be quickly eaten. And he's also helped by his father. Now, you can imagine how long it took to educate poor Henry, only being able to study for an hour a day and learn and so forth. So it's tremendous when you sit back and you think, wow, okay. Now, the thrill that comes into this novel is that during his period of wakefulness, Henry hears a scream coming from the neighbour, and as he looks out to investigate, he sees none other than the President of the United States coming out of the house. And further investigation shows that this woman's been murdered, and it's an amazing chase and epic journey that Henry goes through trying to solve this murder in the time frame that he has. And I think this would make a brilliant movie. I'm very disappointed that Nick Prog hasn't written any more in the Henry Bin series, because it's just wonderful. You can pick it up at Amazon Dark Realmers very, very cheaply too, I might add. And this would make a great movie, okay? Because like I said, protagonists that have a flaw that's going to impact them is just marvellous, because we sympathise with them straight away. We feel their struggle, we feel their plight, and apart from that, we're on the edge of our seat going, oh, what if the killer decides, I'll just pop round while he's asleep and murder him? Those sort of things go through your head. Now, obviously, it'd be very boring for an audience just for the filmmaker to film 23 hours of him asleep, or, like a montage of him. But it could be well done with the proper script. It could be brilliant, because, we could cut to the killer, during when Henry's asleep, and all those scenes that you see in horror and thriller movies where you only see the killer's feet or their gloved hands or whatever, and then cut to Henry, waking up and trying to sort what he's going to do next out. Okay, so I think this would make a great. Okay, Dark Realmers, what drew me towards this great indie novel was the setting. It takes place in turn of the century San Francisco, and we don't get to see the colourful, wonderful, San Francisco that most of us probably think of. This very much concentrates on the seedier side of San Francisco, the wharf areas, the poverty, the decrepit, collapsing buildings, the dregs of humanity, very much so. And you get that strong, powerful sense of what it was like during that time. Now, this story concerns a newspaper journalist who's very, very flawed. He's basically, alcoholic. He's not really well liked. None of those things. So he makes for a really interesting protagonist. And he's working for a newspaper that basically, at the time of this story, all the smaller newspapers, such as the one he's working for, are being swallowed up by great big corporations and millionaires like the Hearsts and all those. And his editor is sort of trying to save the paper, but he knows the end's in sight. Well, bodies are starting to be fished out of San Francisco Bay, and he's assigned this reporter to check it out. Well, the reporter basically starts unravelling things and is directed towards this very seedy boarding house, where at the top of the house in the attic supposedly lives an alchemist, and he befriends some of the residents in this boarding house, and they're a strange collection. And one of the residents is sort of in the thrall of this alchemist, and we don't know what this alchemist is doing. We know somehow he's tied up with these deaths, okay? And it's a great mystery thriller, slight horror. And I think this would make a great movie, because we don't get a lot of movies now that are set in a different time period. We're so used to seeing horror movies and thrillers today where, you know, the slightest sign of problem, people pick up their cell phone or they start their email, all those sort of things. I love the thought of a movie set in a time that, you know, the beginning of the 20th century where things were new, electricity was still wow, all those sort of things, you know. So it gives us a great insight, and you know, it gives us a great chance to you know, just enjoy the scrumptiousness of the costumes and the period and so forth. So I really do think this would make a great thriller stroke horror movie, Dark Realmers. Now check out the book for yourself. It's available on Amazon, and I'm sure other e-readers. I got it for my Kindle, and I'm sure you'll enjoy this one too. Now, Graham Masterton is a very prolific British horror writer, and his first novel, The Manitou, was actually turned into a movie starring Tony Curtis way back in 1980 or something, okay? And he's gone on to write a score of terrific books. So it was very hard for me to pick out one that I thought would make a great movie, because they're all good in their own way and they all have the possibility for making a great movie. But Walker's really fascinated me because it, pardon me, Dark Realmers, it ties in with a lot of British legends and myths from Celtic mythology and Druidism and ley lines. And it basically, the story is a man goes to visit an old home. Well, it's an old abandoned hospital that's up for sale, and it used to be a psychiatric institute. And there's a story about how 126 or so patients, violent patients, just disappeared back in 1926. Now, this guy thinks this building, structurally, it's wonderful, despite the history, would make a great, you know, hotel, come, you know, getaway centre, whatever. So he goes exploring it with his son, and while they're there, his son disappears. Now, there's no sign of his son anywhere. Well, what we discover as the book goes on, there's someone, or maybe a group of people, who have tapped into the power of ley lines. Now, ley lines are energy lines that crisscross the earth, and they're almost like, you know, spiritual highways. And these people have learned how to tap the power to actually walk under the earth and through walls and so forth and grab you from anywhere. So that's chilling. Imagine you're not safe anywhere. You know, like you could think, yeah, I'm in my apartment, I'm fine. Then up comes this hand, you know, from your shagpile carpet and pulls you down into the ground. I would be terrified. And I think this would make a great horror movie because, as I said, it ties in with all that British mythology, which is so fascinating just in itself. And when you combine the horror element of that mythology and that fantasy together, I think you've got the basics for a great movie. Well, Dark Realm, as you know, I'm a horror writer. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here, would you? Now, I could possibly, and I mean possibly, write a fantasy story or a fantasy novel, but I would struggle. I would really struggle with it. And that's why I am so blown away by J.B. Taylor, because this man can turn his hand to virtually any genre and they just flow. The stories are equally as good. You know, one genre is not better than another. He writes equally well in all genres. And I've included JB in my list because not only is he a great author that I just got so much respect for, because he has that ability to write in multi-genre, but also because his dissimilar shorts are just brilliant. And as the title suggests, they're all very different from each other. And the reason I included this is because, as you know, Dark Realmers, from some of my other reviews, I love the old, Hammer, Amicus, movies that had 3 short stories or 4 short stories and were tied together with a theme. And I really believe that we don't get enough of those today. The last one I saw and I reviewed was Kiss Kiss, which you can see the review here in the playlist. And I think JB's Dissimilar Shorts would be wonderful as a trilogy. One of my favourites, and I can't remember from which of the series it was about a ghost of television crew, supposedly investigating a haunted house, and one by one they get murdered, and the twist at the end is just wow. Then there's another one about a river monster, which is like just brilliant. The way he captures, this quiet lake, and then there's this thing that's just can, basically, wow, grab people. And you can see from the cover, he's, to give you an idea, but he's also written stories about aliens coming to Earth. He's written stories about terrorists trying to get information. The guy is just great. And I really think that, I don't know what sort of setting we'd have as a theme for JB's stories. Maybe it's a group of people, sitting down in a country club or something, maybe something in 1800, talking or trying to outdo each other with stories, okay? But it would just be wonderful to see these turned into a series of short films linked together. And I found out just a few days ago, actually, that now JB has his titles not only available on Kindle, but they're also available on audiobook too. But here in Australia, we're a little bit behind with Amazon, sort of, Amazon.com.au hasn't done terribly much. Well, a few months ago, they announced an expansion of Amazon services here, which I was really pleased about. And when I was doing the research and so forth for this, I discovered that JB's Dissimilar Shorts are also available as audiobooks here. So I immediately messaged him and said, hey mate, guess what, your books are available here on audio. I'm so happy for you, and I'm so pleased, we Aussies will get to have the benefit of listening to them. And he was stoked that they're now available down under. And JB's written some other great novels too, like Discovery, sci-fi. So check him out. I've got a link down there for you, Dark Realmers, for JB's YouTube channel. Now, JB is, just hasn't been on YouTube that long, but he's really making a name for himself. He reviews books. He reviews movies. He takes part in a lot of tag games, and he's just one of the nicest guys you could possibly meet. And I'm very proud to have him as not only a friend, but I can announce here I'm sure JB won't call down lightning or anything on me, but we're working on a collaboration of short stories together, and the premise we've got together is just great. I can't tell you any more, but we're busy working on that. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it, because JB is going to contribute something different to each story that he's putting forward into the collection, okay? So check out Dissimilar Shorts if you haven't already, because you're sure to enjoy those. Well, Dark Realmers, not only is Joe Compton an amazing author, but he also runs his own publishing business, and he has a magnificent channel here on YouTube called Go Indie Now. And he's a huge supporter of all forms of indie artists, musicians, artists, writers, filmmakers, and he goes out of his way to promote and encourage people to support the indie community. So just that alone makes him just awesome. But I was just blown away by this book. It's one of the best crime / serial killer police books I've read in a very long time, okay? And when I read this, the first things I was thinking, this was almost like an amalgamation of the Michael Douglas movie Falling Down and Seven, without the Seven Deadly Sins references. And the way Joe has written this serial killer, who basically just seems like a normal everyday Joe, no pun intended, who just snaps one day and starts going on a killing spree. It's just terrifying. But added to that he murders the wife of a police detective, and this police detective spirals down into this uncontrollable alcoholism. He's given up on life. He can't see any, and the rest of his team, his partner and everything, are trying to pull him out of this funk because they need him to track down this serial killer. It's just magnificent. Now, this would make a superb movie. It really would. And I know some of you will say, yes, but Michael, the cop serial killer's done before. But hey, if it was a stale formula, they wouldn't keep making it, would it? And Hollywood, should be taking, the bull by the horns and looking at indies and saying, yes, this is great. We can do something with this. And Joe's work is just, the serial killer, and as I said, as a horror writer, I've said this many times before to you, Dark Realmers, it takes a lot to chill me. And serial killers are always my favourite type of character, because they're just like us. There's no sign above their head saying, hey, psychopath, and you never know what their next action's going to be. And Joe captures this perfectly in his book, He goes home to his wife and you're thinking, oh, is she going to be the next victim, And there's a scene where, he has to visit someone in relation to his work, and this guy is gay and has, fancied him for a while, and he murders him. And that's chilling. And coupled with this, we cut to this detective who you keep pulling for him. You keep saying, come on, we need you. And, every day he's virtually waking up on the couch, with bottles of whiskey and scotch and everything just scattered around. He's just decided to give up on life. And so we, as the audience, as the reader, really feel that we need him. We need this character. We feel for him so strongly. While at the same time, Joe terrifies us with this serial killer as he goes about just killing people. It would make a superb movie. Okay, Dark Realmers, they're my top 10. Now, this won't be the last of my top 10 list by any means, because at my age I've read a lot of books, and there's a lot of indie authors that I just think would benefit so much from having their work turned into movies. So at some stage I'll be making another top 10, okay? And hopefully you'll enjoy that. Well, I hope you've enjoyed my list. Now, have you read any of these books I've mentioned today? If you have, let me know in the comments. Now, do any of them pique your interest? Have you thought, wow, I'd really like to read that myself? If so, let me know in the comments below too, okay? And what are some of the books you've read that you think I'd be interested in reading for myself and looking at in terms of how, they'd go as a movie? I'd be interested to hear that too. Okay, Dark Realmers, well, I've given you some real chillers and some real scare fests today. So I think it's only appropriate that I do finish off, like I always do, with Stay in the Light. So I'll see you next time, and bye for now.